everybody, it's Wednesday, May 29th, 2024. Welcome to the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast, where I think we've doubled up on our intros. It's me, your man, MG Marcas Grant, joined by Michael F. Florio and LaQuan Jones. And Florio, I know this is a football show. I just want to personally thank you and the New York Metropolitans for helping the Dodgers, who had been on the struggle bus for a while, but you were very generous and gifted them both halves of a doubleheader on Tuesday. So that was cool. Thank you.
Look, the first one especially, like the second game, they just lost. The first game, they let the lead, they gave up the lead on a bunt single, like
to a guy hitting 100.
The Mets have blown out. It's something like 6 or 7 leads, something like that, in like a 11-day span. There's
Yikes.
bad, and then there's creatively finding ways to be bad, and that's what the Mets do.
What is it?
Are they tanking for Tua? If there is a Tua.
I mean, it's sort of the it's the line from Moneyball. It's like there's the league, there's 50 feet of crap, and then there's us. Like
Then there's the Mets.
That's kind of, so anyway, I want to thank you for your generosity. If they'd be so kind as to gift them one more just to finish off the series.
Take it.
I'd be grateful for that too. Oh man. Got me all choked up now. Anyway, we're going to dive into some rookie ADP numbers via the folks over at Underdog with best ball drafts very much in full swing. LaQuan, how many best ball drafts have you done so far?
Oh my God, I'm like in 30-something, man. But
Oh,
that's
wow.
just because I've started like literally a month or two ago. Like I just
Okay.
kind of just been going and going and going just to get the idea of like where exactly what we're talking about, where some of these rookies are going.
Yeah, I checked the rankings and the ADPs. I have not done that many. I probably should step up my game a little bit more. That's all. How many have you done, Florio?
Not as many as LaQuan, but in double digits.
Okay.
My toxic habit is I'll be like, I'm bored, and I'll join like 3 or 4 slow drafts at the exact same time, and then like a day later, I get annoyed when I get like 4 notifications that I'm on the clock in 4 different leagues, and I'm like, why do I do this all the time? And then the cycle restarts.
It always starts at night when you're just on your phone, like, no, let me get in a couple slow drafts.
It's always there. You're sitting on the couch. You're like half paying attention to something on TV, and you're like, "Oh, let me just do some drafts."
Yeah.
Like that's exactly how it happens. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, we'll dive into some of the rookie ADPs. We'll avoid some of the bigger names. I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. is where he is, but some of the other guys may be below him. Whether or not we like their ADP, if it's too high, too low, or what have you. And I'm going to borrow from our friends over at the Around the NFL podcast, play a little game of what's more likely with some scenarios that we'll figure out what is more likely to happen this season. But let's start with a little bit of news. And in Baltimore, Ravens offensive coordinator Todd Monken says if Derrick Henry gets 300 carries in 2024, quote, we're having a hell of a year. Okay. I mean, Florio, look, we have seen Derrick Henry get 300 carries before. That is certainly nothing that he can't do, but he is a little bit older. Last year he started to kind of get banged up a little bit. At what point do we worry about Derrick Henry getting 300 carries?
I think you either need to be worried about it now or not at all. Like, there's no, like, if this guy gets more than 250 carries, like, no, if I draft Derrick Henry, I want him to get 300 carries. Yeah. The reason I would be fearful of that is because I think a big talent fall off is coming, and then I would be fading him right now. So I have been worried in the past about heavy workloads and stuff like that, but I've done some digging, and there are plenty of running backs at this age. Not plenty, but there are a good amount who have finished as RB1s with this amount of workload and this amount of age on the wear and tear, like on the tires for Derrick Henry. They're all elite, like historic Hall of Fame kind of running backs, and that's what Derrick Henry is. So I'm willing to bet on the talent and the size and everything holding up for another season here, especially because I think this is the first time ever where defenses aren't going to be coming in and saying we need to stop Derrick Henry if we want to beat this team, because Lamar Jackson is the reigning MVP. You have to worry about him running. You have to worry about him throwing. So fewer stacked boxes, more running lanes. And then I'm hoping, please let these two run the option because it's good for both of them. But I'm in on Derrick Henry in round 3 right now. And in fact, I have him as my RB7. So he could jump a full round and I'd still be in if you want a running back in that range.
Now, I mean, obviously, the Lamar Jackson factor does play into this pretty heavily. As Florio mentioned, he is the reigning MVP. One of the things, LaQuan, we have always seen over the years is that he's obviously going to take a number of the rushing attempts. I mean, there are multiple reasons we haven't seen a Ravens running back get close to 300 rushing attempts. One is because they've had multiple guys there, but one of them is because Lamar Jackson is going to run the football. If Derrick Henry gets in the neighborhood of 300 carries this year, does that necessarily impact what Lamar Jackson can do and be for both the Ravens and for fantasy?
300 is a lot. So yes and no in that question. I feel as though, like, when you combine all the Ravens touches, with J.K. Dobbins, with Justice Hill, or even, Gus Edwards, like, you get up there in the 280 range of where they're still getting production. But I think with the constant rotation, it kind of looks like Lamar putting the team on his back a lot of times. So I think this will be a very good year where he could be an efficient runner. He's always been. I'm just saying it'll be more effective in spots of where he's always going to run out of the pocket to extend the plays. That's constantly going to be a threat. But I think in the red zone, I think some people might be a little worried there, but he's never been like a heavy, quarterback finding a way to rush in the red zone. I mean, Taysom Hill since 2018 has more rushing touchdowns inside the 10 than Lamar Jackson. Let's just let that sit for a second. So it's like, I feel as though this is just going to make this team operate on a completely more efficient cylinder with the running game. You don't have to worry about Lamar taking a bunch of pounding because you have Derrick Henry for that. Derrick Henry gets beat up a little bit, then okay, you have Lamar Jackson to run the option like Florio said, but still you have to worry about Lamar as a passer overall as well.
Well, I think that's the hope. Now, I know, part of the thinking for Monken is if Henry gets toward that number, it's because we're winning games, it's because we're running the football a lot, and we're just trying to grind the clock, which all seems well and good. But, does that mean necessarily that we don't see Lamar throwing the football as much, that we don't see him running as much? As you mentioned, LaQuan, we know they don't use him near the goal line. They never have. They certainly aren't going to now that they have Derrick Henry. They're not going to have, this big behemoth back there and be like, hey, Lamar, you want to go dive in? Let's tush push you in the end zone. Like, it's just not going to happen. And maybe I'm just like overthinking this a little bit, right? It could just be that everything's going to be sort of status quo. And instead of having two guys split, 150, get 150 carries each, it's just one guy who takes most of it. But it was something that sort of jumped out at me. By the way, I don't know if you saw Lamar's best shape of his life. He's dropped some weight and he's faster.
I get that now.
He's faster now.
He might be because he has been slower the last. I think part of it is
slower, air quotes here, like
yes, he's still Lamar Jackson and he could still run a bunch, but like he hasn't put up those 2019 rushing numbers. His top speed has declined a little bit, and we've actually seen him get caught from behind now, which you never saw back in the day. But I think Derrick Henry opens up a whole bunch for Lamar Jackson as a runner as well, because now if you do stack near the line of scrimmage, Lamar could beat you out wide, and then that's where his speed comes into play. And if you're loading up near the line of scrimmage, now he can beat you downfield on one-on-one coverage and stuff. So remember like a couple years ago when Daniel Jones was a top 10 quarterback because he was running so much? It was largely because teams had to decide on the option, do we want to try to stop Saquon or Daniel Jones? And then it just leads to huge running lanes for the quarterback. So maybe we get Lamar running less, but it could be much, much more efficient, I think.
Maybe. That could be. And some of this also goes to the wide receivers too. Like, can these guys step up and perform? Can Zay Flowers build on what he did last year? Can Rashad Bateman come around to being the guy we hope he can be? Can Tez Walker step up and be a playmaker in this offense as well? That remains to be seen. We can all be optimistic about it. In Houston, D'Amico Ryans says that Damen Pierce and Joe Mixon can be a 1-2 punch for the Houston Texans. So, LaQuan, should we upgrade Damen Pierce or should we downgrade Joe Mixon?
Uh, no, just wait on it. I just feel so bad for Damen Pierce because you guys know I'm a huge fan of him, man. And like last year, things were looking good. He was out snapping Devin Singletary. He was getting the touches. I mean, back-to-back games in that period before he got injured, he had 20 plus carries. So the team likes him. D'Amico Ryans always praises him, but I don't think he's gonna leave Joe Mixon. Even if Joe Mixon is a guy that sees less touches this year, I think it's still Joe Mixon's backfield. I think Dameon Pierce will be utilized a lot more on this hybrid kickoff because last season we see how explosive he was running back like a 76-yard return. So I think he will get a lot of his pop on special teams, and then he'll take some of the breath off of Joe Mixon. But how I'm attacking the draft is that Joe Mixon's the guy that's likely going to be up there in the 230 touches range.
I mean, are you down with that, Florio, or are you feeling some other kind of way?
I feel a little bit different, but for a different reason. I agree with what LaQuan said. I think this is Joe Mixon's backfield. I think that Joe Mixon could still play at a high level. Last season, he had the most percentage of runs go for 10 or more yards since 2018. And he did so with seeing more loaded boxes than he has in those years in between those. So now he goes to the Houston, where one of the best deep ball throwers in the league, and CJ Stroud is there. I think that'll help open a lot near the line of scrimmage for him. But I'm drafting a ton of Dameon Pierce right now for two reasons. One, I mean, he's going after the top 200 picks, so he's absolutely free. If anything happens to Joe Mixon, he will become the workhorse there. But I just don't think he's a great fit for this Texans run system. We saw his numbers decline greatly when they changed the OC and kind of became more of an outside running team. I keep thinking, like, what if this guy gets traded in August or something like that? Like, what if he ends up on Dallas or on the Chargers, where they run a power heavy run system where he would thrive in those systems? So to me, I keep throwing like 17th, 18th round picks on Dameon Pierce and just crossing my fingers that he ends up somewhere else, because we see running back more than other positions kind of change teams in August.
And I think that's the lane that he fits into right now, because in terms of just what he brings to the table, I think Joe Mixon can do everything Dameon Pierce can, but also catch the football a little bit better.
Yeah.
And I think he's sort of a nice fit there. So I think that's probably, if you're drafting Pierce, probably the way to go with it at all. Christian Watson says he is hoping to put his hamstring injuries behind him. He is working on sort of evening out. I guess he had more muscle mass kind of in one hamstring than the other. He's trying to even some things out. I don't know if either of you saw this. There was a little bit of physical therapist on physical therapist violence on Twitter.
I did not.
No.
Okay, violence is maybe too strong of a word. Heat. How about that? Look, there are a lot of PTs on Twitter who do some good work on trying to sort of explain how injuries work and try to give you a basic timeline of when a guy can return, that sort of thing. And sort of this training method and what Watson was trying to do. There were kind of some disagreements, we'll say, on Twitter about guys and their suggestions on things. Whatever. That's neither here nor there. Christian Watson, though, a wide receiver in what is a very crowded wide receiver room in Green Bay. I mean, Florio, how are you sorting through this wide receiver room for the Packers?
I love Jaden Reed. I will take him at cost. I've seen some people on Twitter like souring on him a little bit, but I think he is just the type of player that you go into the season generating touches for, whether it be on the ground, through the air, downfield. He could do it all. So I really like him. After that, the three Wicks, Watson, and Doubs are all kind of bunched together. But to me, Doubs is like the safe floor, low ceiling kind of player. He's the one that I want the least of them all. I see the upside case for Wicks, but I'm a sucker for explosiveness. So getting Christian Watson at wide receiver 46, even though I know there was no chemistry between him and Jordan Love last year, and it was kind of a lost season, I still remember Watson breaking 60-yard touchdown runs downfield or catch and run. So when I see that upside at wide receiver 46, it's hard to pass up.
Are you in? I've heard a lot of chatter about Dontavian Wicks recently. LaQuan, are you buying any of that?
I am. I think I'm buying into it just so I can avoid the worry about Christian Watson because I love that he's wide receiver 46. But the problem is where he's going in best ball leagues, I need him to fall a little bit lower for me to take on that risk factor with Christian Watson. So at wide receiver 61, you can get Wicks, who showed that he could be productive with the opportunities. I mean, you're looking at the connection between him and Jordan Love, and it was just automatic. It wasn't anything that we had to worry about. It didn't take time to kind of build up. It kind of happened as soon as he got on the field and he was able to gain momentum. So I'm going to take on a guy that is way cheaper than all these guys to where I'm looking at Wicks when he's entering my roster as a fill-in, a guy that can come in as soon as Watson goes down. He's a guy that you can stash. You can put him on your watch list, whatever the case may be. But I'd rather take the value on a guy that I know can produce when given the opportunity. And I don't think Watson's going to fall back into a starting role. I think it's going to have to be a slow burn to where he's going to have to gain that chemistry with Jordan Love because the numbers that I provided before, you can go check out my Twitter, the passer rate and the completion percentage, Watson able to not being able to separate and be able to be in the right spot. That's where it becomes down to a problem where I can't risk taking Watson in the 7th round when there's other guys in that round that I kind of like better.
I mean, I have kind of gone toward. I think about a sprinkling of all these guys. Just
That's the
because,
right way to do it, I think.
right. I mean, I know it sounds like a
Yeah.
cop out, right? But because, especially in a best ball situation, I think in redraft this is going to be an incredibly frustrating room to deal with because it's going
Yeah.
to be hard to pinpoint on any given week who the guy is. I think that is the beauty of best ball is that you can sort of take shots at all of them, and theoretically you can be okay there. Now, Wicks is the guy who I think everybody sort of loves. It's like, how everybody loves the backup quarterback, right? In best ball, everybody loves kind of this secondary or number 3 wide receiver that has a path to getting on the field, but might not necessarily be there all the time. But a guy like Dontavian Wicks does have that upside that he can get on the field, he can make some plays, and he can eventually get those opportunities, but you don't have to necessarily live with him on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah.
I would think that if there's a guy, if we're talking redraft, Jaden Reed is probably still the guy I want in a redraft situation. But again, I think there will be Jaden Reed weeks. There will be Christian Watson games. There may even be the occasional Romeo Doubs game in there.
Yeah.
Which side note, remember a couple years ago, it was like, it's going to be the Christian Watson Romeo Doubs show in this offense. And now we're talking about like those guys, depending on the week, could be number 3 and 4.
Yeah.
I never understood the Romeo Doubs love. I get like Watson, I'm saying, but purely for best ball, but like he could go out and get like 150 and 2 in a given game. I don't have to figure out when that's going to be, but I get that huge spike week
Yeah.
when he does it.
Actually, here's the thing. I will say, I know that the Daniel Jeremiah, who obviously we all know and love and trust immensely, he really thought Doubs could be a good fit in the Packer offense. And I think he was. And when he first hit, I mean, he had a really good start to his rookie season, sort of faded a little bit late. And I think, I certainly bought in. They have done a very good job in scouting wide receivers in Green Bay over the last few years. And so, they're in a good spot because they've got a lot of guys. They don't really care about our fantasy teams, but for their actual team, it's a really good spot for them to be in offensively.
Jordan Love is the winner that it comes down to. So draft
Yeah.
Jordan
Yep.
Love.
Yeah, I guess that's the short answer to this whole thing. Just draft Jordan Love and be done with it. In Dallas, Brandon Cooks predicts this will be a breakout year for Jalen Tolbert as the wide receiver 3 in Dallas. We know CeeDee Lamb is the wide receiver 1. Cooks is there as the wide receiver 2. It's sort of up in the air for wide receiver 3 right now. I mean, LaQuan, is there any value beyond those top 2 guys? Also, when you factor in, they've got tight ends they have to work in.
Yeah.
Ezekiel Elliott is back. Do we care about the wide receiver 3 in Dallas?
No, I don't even think he would be the 3rd option, to be honest. I think he's one of those guys, like, if you're a fan of him, you want to see him do really good. I mean, like, he falls in the category of, like, deeper leagues where you stash him. I mean, like, the Trey Palmers of the world, the Tutu Atwells, you really want them to do well and fit as that wide receiver 3, but if they're on an offense that really has a tight end or running back as the second option sometimes where, the wide receiver 3 is just there as a decoy most of the time. So I don't advise people to go out there and draft him and expect weekly production out of him. But if you're in the deeper leagues, take a shot on him,
I mean, can Dak Prescott support all these pass catchers on a consistent basis.
Consistent base.
If they were good, yes. We've seen him do it with CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, and Michael Gallup that one year. But Jalen Tolbert's been in the NFL for 2 years. He has 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. The list of wide receivers to have that few production in 2 years in the NFL and go on to succeed is extremely, extremely low. Plus, I'm not even that interested in Brandon Cooks. I mean, he had 3 games last year with more than 50 yards. Like, I know he had the 172-yard game, and that one is like, that's why you draft Brandon Cooks in best ball. And the upside for him to have those huge weeks is still there with Dak. But, like, I'm not that interested because, I think the number 2 target is going to be Ferguson. So, Lamb is going to get 11 targets a game again. So, Cooks is that boomer bust option, and then after that, it's maybe real life pieces they could contribute, but not for fantasy.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I don't know that. Again, it's the kind of thing where if you do enough best ball drafts, you probably will take a swing at one of those guys. But I think that's going to be pretty tough. I'll say that on a regular basis for sure. So here we are, very much in the thick of best ball draft season. And, I think it's always interesting to sort of look at some of the first year players, because especially if you are drafting this early, or even if you started drafting a month ago, you want to plant your flag on some of the rookies, right? You want to say that you were ahead of the curve, and especially because generally speaking, you can probably get a better value on some of these guys the earlier you're drafting them, before the hype really truly builds and everybody gets in and starts drafting them. Now, look, we know some of the guys at the top. We know Marvin Harrison is going to go really, really early. I'm in a mock draft where I think I took him with the 2nd pick of the 2nd round in a 12-team mock draft. Romo Dunze is going to go fairly high. We'll get in, we'll avoid some of those guys just because I think it sort of is what it is. But there are a handful of other names that I was sort of interested in getting your opinions on. So, Florio, I'll start with you here on Malik Nabers. 29.1 is the average draft position for him. He is the wide receiver 20. The upside on him is that he looks like the wide receiver 1 in New York. The downside for him is that he's the wide receiver 1 in New York. And that's, mind you, the Giants, not the Jets. It's Daniel Jones, not Aaron Rodgers. So a top 30 pick for Malik Nabers, are you okay with that? Is that too high or too low?
I think it's too high, and I love Malik Nabers. I ranked him as my wide receiver 1 coming into the NFL draft ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., and I think he can win. And the reason he was number 1 for me is because I think he can win in every single way you want a player to win. He could win downfield. He could win in the intermediate area. He could take a pass that's behind the line of scrimmage and take it the distance. He is that electric, and he could just do everything on the football field. I also really do like him because I think Brian Daboll is a better offensive mind than he gets credit for. I think people maybe have forgotten that after the season the Giants had last year, but he's going to draw up 10 targets per game, I believe, for this kid. The only thing is the names that he's going over right now. Devonta Smith is one of the most proven wide receivers. I like Michael Pittman Jr. more. Cooper Kupp, I can never quit. DK Metcalf, I have ranked higher. In my first ranking go around, I had him at wide receiver 28. But even there's like 3 or 4 wide receivers directly after him that I'm like, if you made a good case for them over Nabers, I wouldn't argue. So I like him a lot more if you could get him as a wide receiver 3 than having to pay up and get him as a 2.
How exactly is he going over some of those names, LaQuan? I mean,
I don't know.
Somebody make a case for me, please.
I think it has to be you're still on the post-draft high where, you're looking at him as the certified wide receiver 1 of the class. So a lot of people are going to these best ball drafts still on that high, thinking that, hey, he's going to see over 100 targets. Yes, that is true. But there's been other players and other examples of previous years that 100 targets ain't enough. 1,000 yards ain't enough. A 20% target share ain't enough when you're capped at like 12 to 13 fantasy points per game. That doesn't warrant you to be going in the 3rd round over some of these proven talents. I'd rather take a Jalen Waddle or a Devontae Smith, like Florio was saying. These guys are proven talent that have good quarterback play or even elite quarterback play. Now we're looking at New York We got Daniel Jones returning back from multiple injuries, and we don't even know if he's going to be ready to go week 1 with the backup as Drew Lock. So it doesn't scream to me efficient targets. It doesn't scream to me touchdown scoring opportunities. So in that third round, it's pretty nasty work if you ask me.
And I think it just comes down to the basic question that we always have to ask ourselves. Do you want the number 1 target in a mediocre to bad offense versus the number 2 target in a good to great offense? And I think that's sort of where we're getting with, I mean, Devonta Smith, I guess, is technically the number 2, but he and A.J. Brown are sort of 1A and 1B in Philadelphia.
Yeah, Batman, skinny Batman, what is it?
Batman and skinny Batman.
I mean, there you go.
Yeah, man. And even
Cooper Kupp could be their top target on their team. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Jalen Waddle he's the number 2 target behind Tyreek Hill, but we've seen the passing volume and we've seen that Tua can support both of those guys. We're still not sold on Daniel Jones and how much he can. It's starting to roll off. It's starting to roll off the tongue. I'm a little bit scared that I'm going to say that for real, on Fantasy Live or something this year.
It's going to happen like week 2.
I know. I really shouldn't get so comfortable with it because it's just starting to just roll out really easily now. Anyway, but I think I'm with you guys. Like a top 30 pick feels like a little bit too much for Malik Nabers. It just feels like a flag plant for a guy that doesn't necessarily have the path to that level of production in New York. Meanwhile, in Jacksonville, Brian Thomas, 74.6 is the ADP, wide receiver 42. LaQuan, I know we try not to get too hyped over OTA reports, but man, the OTA reports for Brian Thomas are really good down there right now. I find myself getting a little bit more excited about him. Again, top 75 pick for Brian Thomas, higher or lower than that?
I'm scared to say, but it might be higher by the time we get to August because these camp reports are really, really good, like what you're saying. And on top of that, we're getting video of it. So it's like, oh, man, like I had to move Trevor Lawrence up in my rankings. I know before months ago, I've said he's a fantasy bust, but this might be the year that we might see Trevor Lawrence unlocked. I mean, Brian Thomas is out there. He's stretching the field. He's going to be a difference maker. So I'm okay with taking him in the 7th round of where he's going at in best ball leagues right now.
I mean, Florio, can he compete target-wise with Christian Kirk? I mean, I think he can compete with Gabe Davis, but I mean, can he get enough targets to sort of push Christian Kirk in that offense?
No, I don't think so. And I think at best he's their 3rd target because I think he'll be behind Evan Ingram as well. And then he's battling it out with Gabe Davis for those downfield targets because that is one area where Gabe Davis plays well. Plus, Gabe Davis is a good run blocker, and I know we don't care about that for fantasy, but it helps keep you on the field. It's why he played more snaps than any Bills wide receiver in his tenure because he's so good at that area that you just leave him out there in 2 wide receiver sets, 3 wide receiver sets. So Brian Thomas could be the wide receiver 3 on his own team. Maybe he outproduces Gabe Davis. I think he will. But snaps and opportunity-wise, he could be 3rd. I see the appeal. I will also say I didn't love Brian Thomas Jr. as a prospect as much as everyone else. Everyone had him like as the consensus 4th wide receiver. I had him a little lower than that. But like he's going ahead of Deontay Johnson. To me, that's a huge mistake. Rashee Rice, he's only going ahead of because we don't know the legal issues. Then there's a lot of receivers in that range that I'm like, are just like Brian Thomas. So, but you could get a little bit later. So I see the appeal and I see the upside, but I don't anticipate myself drafting him a whole bunch.
A couple things to that too. One, I think you're going to start to see Deontay Johnson's ADP go up a little bit because it just feels like in the last couple of weeks, everybody has come to this realization that, hey man, the Panthers might not suck as much this year, right? That all of a sudden everybody's looking around at Bryce Young and being like, hey man, this dude's kind of a value. And Deontay Johnson is, hey man, this dude's kind of a value. I think you're going to see those ADPs go up. So maybe that helps Thomas a little bit. I don't know about you guys. I'm not confident in Rashee Rice. And it has nothing to do with the legal system at all. I'll leave it there because we'll talk about him a little bit later in the show, so I won't get into it too much. But I have my concerns. We'll say that. maybe I'm being sucked in by the camp reports. I'm okay with Brian Thomas rather at where he is, wide receiver 42. I will take the swing at him. I could be wrong. We get to August and I look a little bit silly, but for now, I'm sort of buying in on this one. Jonathan Brooks. First running back drafted in the NFL draft. He's the running back 24 right now. 88.3 is the ADP. Florio, I suspect that if we get reports that he's healthy and ready to go earlier in the season, that ADP may go up even higher. But for now, just inside the top 90, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I think it's like just right, his ADP, because you look at the running backs he's going right behind right now. It's Zamir White, DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, and then right ahead it's Jalen Warren, Zach Moss, Tony Pollard, James Conner. I can make an argument for him to be higher or to be lower. It all comes down to, I think, the health. And we're going to find out as camp goes on. Not only is he going to be ready to suit up early on in the season, but is he looking like himself? Because not only does it take usually a first year to get that full burst back and that explosion back from the torn ACL, but it also takes a couple of weeks for these running backs to trust it fully again. Like Breece Hall in September was a very different running back than Breece Hall the rest of the year. So to me, RB24 feels appropriate, and it could go up a few spots. I think it also could drop a solid 5-6 spots or something like that, and depending all on the reports we get in August.
LaQuan, a healthy Jonathan Brooks is the RB1 there in Carolina, right? He beats Chuba Hubbard. He beats Miles Sanders when he's healthy.
Yes, 100%. I mean, we all seen the tape, before this guy went down with injury. And I think, you just have to have your expectations in order when you're drafting a guy like Brooks. Like, just have the understanding that it might be a slow burn. I don't see him really making noise until probably October, but I think Chuba Hubbard, he still gets the first licks because he was really productive for that backfield last year. A lot of people haven't really looked at his numbers and noticed that, but I think he still will be involved as well very early on. So where you're getting him at, running back 24, that's like in the 7th, 8th round range. Like, hey, why not take a shot at him in the, RB3, RB4, wherever you're at in your roster, where just have your expectations in order when you're taking him. But I think he's absolutely the RB1 by the time this season wraps up.
And I think this is where it's important to point out that these are best ball ADPs. And so you are sort of hoping for these guys to hit later in the season. And so I think for a guy like Jonathan Brooks, especially, the expectation is by the time we get to December, that he is back on the field, he is getting a good number of snaps, and that he has sort of pushed, certainly Sanders aside, and is really gunning for that RB1 job in Carolina. So that optimism, I think, has something to do with it. Blake Corum, RB39, 124.8 is the ADP. I mean, LaQuan, we've sort of talked about this with Kyren Williams not being 100% healthy. I would assume that number is continuing to climb. You being our resident Rams homer here, how do you feel about Corum just inside the top 125?
I'm excited, man. I love where he's going in drafts because a lot of people are still kind of sleeping on him. But I feel as though, once the summer comes around and we're still hearing reports about Kyron's health or him sitting out of practice, et cetera, it's just only going to rise. So jump on the value now. And I really feel as though, this guy is going to be such a huge red zone threat. We saw him find the end zone more times than not last season, in his college years. And I really feel as though you're going into an offense that's going to be a high power, healthy offense going into the season with Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and a healthy Matthew Stafford. So the opportunity for him is on the table. And I did a stat yesterday with Kyren Williams that he was the only running back since 2017 to be able to have 10 touches between each halves. And that's Todd Gurley, the other guy who's been able to do that as a Ram. So it's like his involvement throughout the game is crucial to where he's going to get these touches. Blake Corum, that is on the table for him if Kyron was going to miss time. I don't want to say he's going to come in and fall in day one and just go out the gate and take his job, but I really feel as though to be in this opportunity to be able to develop and get the reps, this is awesome for Blake Corum to be in this offense with Sean McVay.
You mentioned Todd Gurley, and I think his name always sort of applies when we talk about Rams running backs and Sean McVay, because McVay has sort of said, pour one out. McVay has said repeatedly that he is hesitant to use a guy similar to what he did with Gurley, that he doesn't want to just overwork one guy. Now it sort of happened last year with Kyron Williams that, he was just outplaying everybody else. There were really no other options that McVay was super in love with. Um, that being said, Florio, I mean, look, it's one thing to talk about Blake Corum in the context of Williams and a foot injury. It's another thing just to talk about Blake Corum, the player in general. Could he carve out a role even with a healthy Kyron Williams, despite how well Williams played last year?
I think so, because he's a very similar style player to Kyron Williams. And I think that's partially why we didn't see Kyron Williams leave the field last year. It was like, okay, we take this guy off. We're getting significantly worse production at that position. So we're just going to play him 80 to 90% of the snaps and give him the bulk of all the work. And one thing we've seen teams do in recent years is rather than pull a running back off for a couple of plays and mix and match guys, it'll be like, okay, this whole drive is one running back. This whole drive is another running back. And we like to see teams often rotate it 2 drives for the starter, and then the third drive goes to the backup. I could see Blake Corum playing in that role. And you look at where he's going in drafts right now. He's going right behind the Washington running backs. You got Tajay Spears and Chase Brown ahead of him. Right behind him are both Cowboys running backs, Jerome Ford, Zach Charbonnet. So to me, those are all RB2s in their own offense, or situations where we don't know who the lead running back is going to be, like in Dallas, something like that. But it's a very appropriate group, I think, because all of these guys, whether injury or something like that happen, could get a huge boost in value. So if you're doing a lot of best ball drafts, this is a great area of the draft to kind of like, okay, one draft, I'm going to take this guy. Next draft, I'm going to take this guy. But I do really like Blake Corum, and he is someone at cost that I have been targeting in my drafts.
Yeah, I've been targeting him and pretty much at cost. I think I will admit I had a little more interest in him hearing the reports on Kyron, but also sort of keeping in mind that this could just be precautionary with the Rams, where they're just kind of keeping Kyron Williams out of action for now, because it's May, and
It is.
it's May, and there's no need to push him right now, when he's a little bit banged up. So it could be that by the time we get to camp, everything's okay. But I still won't feel bad. I don't think I'll be too overextended on Blake Corum on any of my rosters there. Last one. This one to me was super interesting. Jermaine Burton, 152.1, wide receiver 70. I mean, Florio, yes, I know we always talk about off-field concerns, but like, he got drafted. He's on a team. He's on a roster. Everybody loves the talent. I am surprised that he's going outside the top 150. Are you surprised he's going outside the top 150?
Yes, but it is a pure buying opportunity. He's actually my most drafted wide receiver right now. And I was a little bit lower on him than some other people as a prospect. I still really liked him. I thought he could win downfield. He could move all over the field and such. But the landing spot, I was like, I don't care about any of that other stuff anymore. He's a top 3 wide receiver on a team that should have an elite offense with an elite quarterback that uses a ton of 3 wide receiver sets. Plus, T. Higgins is on the franchise tag right now.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I talk about a lot is like, look, football's a very physical, violent game. We know that. These guys are always out there playing through injuries when we get into the middle to later part of the seasons. We have seen lots of players, and I don't want to get in the head of T. Higgins and say anything, but like, we've seen players not push themselves through injuries when they're on a contract year, because why would they risk all of that without the financial security? So if anything happens to either of those other 2 wide receivers, he now becomes a top 2 wide receiver for Joe Burrow, and especially in best ball. I do think he'll be inconsistent, at least early on, but the big playability is so there. And I think we could see with Tyler Boyd gone, we could see more rotation with Burton going in the slot at times and Chase going in the slot at times. So yeah, wide receiver 70 outside the top 150. It's an auto draft for me right now.
I mean, look, LaQuan, we have seen the Bengals use 3 wide receiver sets. We know what a healthy Joe Burrow can do. Is there a reason he's going? I mean, I'm trying to wrap my head around why this is happening. I don't know if you have any logical explanation for why no one is clicking on Jermaine Burton right now.
I don't, because I think a lot of people are looking at his draft capital and kind of putting into like he might be a little troublemaker. He's very mouthy, but There's a lot that comes with that bark. There's some bite to that, man. He's a very talented wide receiver, so I'm not quite sure why he's going so late. So I feel as though just jump on the value now and kind of wait for his opportunity, because we're looking at T. Higgins, like we explained, he's on a contract year. He didn't even sign the franchise tag yet. Didn't show up to OTAs. We don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the Bengals have given out 3 franchise tags in the last 10 years. None of them signed long term. So Florio's point, he was banged up last season. If he gets banged up this season, why would he push himself through this contract year when he could just capitalize on the bag? We saw it happen with Allen Robinson with the Bears when he signed with the Rams, which was a bad contract, but a whole different story, a whole different chapter. But I feel as though T. Higgins, man, he will be still the T. Higgins that we know and love with a healthy Joe Burrow. It's just going to have to take some time and patience to get Jermaine Burton to basically develop and get the reps and be able to perform. So for fantasy this year, I'm going to jump on the value. If he hits, he hits. If he doesn't, he doesn't. I'm looking forward to year 2 for Burton.
Well, certainly at 150, 152, it's not much of a risk there.
Free money.
If he doesn't hit,
whatever.
Whatever.
You're not up, baby.
You're not out anything. But if it does turn out to be something, then you're sitting on the mother of all values at this point. It is
he's this year's Puka Nacua. I'll say it.
I don't know.
I'll say it. I'll say it.
No one is this year's Puka.
Right. I think that's it. No one's this year's Puka. There's no Puka.
Without
the word Puka.
I actually looked. Burton is my number 2 most drafted wide receiver. I think number 1 could be this year's Puka. It's Malachi Corley.
Oh my God. I have Malachi. Those are my 2 top rookie exposures right now in best ball.
All right. By the way, you talk about the draft capital for Jermaine Burton. It ended up being more than anybody thought. I mean, before all the other stuff happened, all the other news came out, he was potentially a day 1 pick. Then it was like, well, he might go day 3. Who knows? And then he ends up going. It ended up working out better than I think a lot of people anticipated for Jermaine Burton. Anyway. All apologies to our friends at the ATN podcast. They love to play the game What's More Likely, so I figured I would borrow that for us, for our situation. 4 scenarios here. What do you guys think is more likely? LaQuan, starting with you here. More likely to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year, Baker Mayfield or Justin Herbert?
Ooh. Oh, man. That's tough because Baker
these are supposed to be easy.
Baker was baking last year. He was cooking, man. He was damn near top 10 as well in points per game.
But he doesn't have Dave Canales anymore.
I know. That's the thing. And then you got to look at the pass volume for Justin Herbert as well. So I'm a cop out. I'm going to go Justin Herbert.
All right. Your answer here, Florio?
I think it's Justin Herbert. And Baker last year was the QB 10 in total points, and Herbert was QB 17, but in points per game, it flipped. And that's what I care more about. Like after the season ends, it's like, okay, on a per game basis, Baker was QB 17 in his career year. And now he loses his OC, like you said. So I look, his new OC comes from the McVay tree. I know there's a lot of success there, but he's also very, very unproven. And it's going to be another new offense that Baker has to learn. I feel like Baker's never had the same OC for more than 2 seasons in a row, which is kind of crazy. But even with all the negative things with Justin Herbert, I'll take him.
I'm going to say Baker. Yes, he did lose Dave Canales. Yes, he has a new offense. Look, learning a new offensive scheme for Baker, like that's like whatever at this point, right? Like it's whatever, man. Like it's just old hat. That's just what he does. He has Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Justin Herbert right now we're talking about Ladd McConkey. And look, Ladd McConkey is a very talented player. I don't think Ladd McConkey should be your wide receiver 1 in his rookie year while we're still trying to figure out what Quentin Johnston can be, who Josh Palmer is with a head coach and an offensive coordinator that wants to run the football. So I'm going to take Baker as more likely to finish as a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year. Florio, more likely to finish as the RB1 this year, Christian McCaffrey, ho-hum, same as it ever was, or Breece Hall?
You could give me literally any running back versus Christian McCaffrey, and it's Christian McCaffrey. One thing that Marcus, I talk about a lot is like especially in the first round of my drafts, when I'm looking at who to take first, I think of it as like who has the highest percentage odd of being top 5, RB1, whatever. And Christian McCaffrey leads in all of that. I mean, Not only did he finish over 100 points better than any other running back last year, which RB2 was Breece Hall. And you could say, yeah, Breece Hall had the slow start. Okay, he still played an extra game than CMC and finished over 100 points behind him last year. And that's the thing, that the receiving numbers, that the fact that the 49ers are going to be one of the best offenses in football again and give him so many scoring opportunities, it's CMC and then it's everyone else.
You on board with that, LaQuan?
Absolutely. You can't bet against CMC, man. 101.
All right. I mean, yeah, I'll probably make it unanimous. The reason I threw this in here, though, is just the stat from our research team that it's been a while since someone has finished back-to-back as the RB1.
Clinton Portis, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think Clinton Portis was the one. Also, the fact that it's very rare that the first running back drafted, the guy with the highest ADP at the running back position, finishes as the RB1. That's also not a thing that happens very often. So just sort of taking that into account.
Which is why you take a wide receiver in round 1.
I mean, last year that didn't work out either. Last year, round 1 generally stunk, except for McCaffrey. He was like the only guy in round 1 that was
Jefferson, Chase.
Everybody just was kind of like, yeah. But yeah, I mean, more likely, probably Christian McCaffrey. All right, LQ, more likely to have a year 2 breakout, Jackson Smith-Njigba or Michael Wilson?
Now, hearing this and reading it, I almost went Michael Wilson, but I'm gonna jump on the JSN train. I'm gonna jump on the train just based on his ability to create after the catch. So I see how they're trying to deploy him, how to utilize him, and you got a new OC over there where I feel as though they might figure out some way to properly to get him involved. Because when I was looking at yak yards from targets within the 5-yard scrimmage, he was actually 3rd in yards after the catch behind Chase and another notable wide receiver I'm forgetting right now. But to be top 3, that's pretty impressive of like being able to get the yards after the catch on screen passes. So he has the ability to stretch, the field and be able to be utilized in the middle of the field. So hopefully we can get more out of him. Michael Wilson, you have Marvin Harrison Jr. over there, man. I think it's going to be a hot commodity over there when it comes to the target share. So I'll go with JSN.
I know, Florio, I know how you feel about Michael Wilson. Are you going to take him over JSN here?
No. Both of these guys are at worst, or maybe at best, you could say in Wilson's case, the 3rd target on their team. Because McBride is going to get more targets than Wilson as well. Wilson struggles to stay healthy. That was his big thing in college. But JSN was my wide receiver 1 in that class, and I still firmly believe in his talent. He's awesome. The usage was awful last year, and it could be again this year, but Tyler Lockett will be 32 in September. He's approaching decline period, and I think JSN was drafted not for last season, but for this year and beyond to kind of take over. So, yeah, I think JSN is a good value at where he's going right now.
New OC as well in Seattle, maybe a guy who wants to use more 3 wide receiver sets. That wasn't something they did a lot of last year for the Seahawks. So I'm going to go JSN as well. I'm curious about Michael Wilson. I mean, I liked him kind of as a deep sleeper last year. But yeah, is there enough volume there, which there may be with Kyler Murray, to sustain 3 pass catchers? Because, Florio, you hit it. It's Harrison, then it's Trey McBride, and then maybe it's Michael Wilson. Last one, Florio, more likely to fall off in year 2, Rashee Rice or Jaden Reed, after we spent a lot of time talking about the Packers wide receivers?
I really want to hear your reasoning, but for me, I think most likely to fall off is Rashee Rice because the legal stuff, if he's not there to start the year, this is a more crowded and better talented wide receiver room than it's been. And now the last 2 years, the offense has been built off of yak. Now I think we're going to see the deep ball back from Mahomes and the Chiefs with Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy there. Plus, there's Travis Kelce. There's a lot of target comp. We've kind of said that for the Packers, but I do think Reed will be the top target and they'll generate touches for him and stuff. I like both of them. I don't think either one of them necessarily falls off, but if I have to pick, I think Rashee Rice is more likely.
All right, who are you picking, LaQuan?
I'm going to go Rice. I'm waiting to hear your reason.
I mean, look, I'm going right. I'm legitimately worried about Rashee Rice this year. One, because yes, they go out and they get Marquise Brown. They go out and they draft Xavier Worthy. Obviously, they still have Travis Kelce. And a big part of what they did with Rashee Rice was manufacture opportunities for him. I mean, it wasn't like they just lined him up and they let him go win one-on-one on routes or just try to find spots in zones. So many of his touches were manufactured. And yeah, he was great after the catch. But when you have guys that can legitimately win, when you have Marquise Brown who can legitimately win, when you have Xavier Worthy who can win, Travis Kelce's going to continue to eat. Are they going to spend as much time trying to generate touches for Rashee Rice in this offense? And I don't think they are. I think he'll get some occasionally. I don't think he's going to get the same number of opportunities that he did last year. I mean, it sort of worked out because they didn't have any wide receivers that they could count on, and he stepped into the void there. That void no longer exists. I just don't see him getting the same level of touches that he did last season, and I really worry about it. And then throw in all the off-field stuff and whatever legal situation happens and any potential suspensions if something like that comes around. But I just think from just a straight-up football standpoint, I don't know that we see the same level of attention paid to Rashee Rice this year that we did last year. That's it.
Boom.
That's it.
Nail on the head.
I think it's a good, legit concern. Like,
Yeah.
The only, because down the stretch, I mean, his since from week 11 on, or week 12 on, it was 10 targets, 9 targets, 10, 9, 12. And then he had 6 where he had the big yardage that game. That's the only thing I think that could save him. I do agree, Marcus. I think his volume will decline. But maybe if those guys are tearing it up downfield, he gets a little bit more room to run and could be more efficient. But it's a legit concern.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Rashee Rice is a name that I have been staying away from just because I don't know that he's going to get the same kind of looks. And look, Patrick Mahomes has sort of said, we want to be more vertical. We want to go downfield a little bit more. Now we have the personnel to do it, where we really didn't the last couple.
He's been itching. You could tell.
Yeah,
He's been itching.
100%.
He doesn't have MVS down there anymore.
Yeah, that's probably for the better. Anyway, that's a good spot for us to pause for this week. We'll be back with you tomorrow for another edition of the Cheat Sheet. We will have another edition of Florio's Film Festival. I guess, spoiler alert. We'll be watching The Raid Redemption, which, if you've never seen it, it is bonkers. It is 100% bananas. I put out the poll last week about what sort of genre we should do, and it was pretty much split between action movies and martial arts movies. So this sort of fits the bill for both. So we'll do this one. I think what's going to end up happening is we'll just sort of pick an array of movies. And you guys are always welcome to jump into the chat and suggest movies or hit us up on social media and suggest movies. But we'll be back. We'll talk some football. We'll talk some movies. We'll have a good time on the Cheat Sheet. So be sure to check that out as we are streaming for that tomorrow. By the way, I should say this more often, and I don't. Go out and subscribe. Like the podcast, subscribe to it. Make sure it shows up in your feed whenever we drop new ones as well. And go check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well so you don't miss anything that we are doing over there also. So anyway, that'll do it for this edition of the NFL Fantasy Football Podcast. Stay happy, safe, and healthy. Do good and live well. Enjoy the day. Enjoy the week. We'll talk to you again real soon.